While explaining this problem of scarcity in the first video of this course, I defined these resources as the things with which you can make goods and services. Or I said you can think of them as inputs that you need to make different products. Now these resources, remember, are also known as factors of production. And there are a few details that we need to know about these resources. We need to know how economists think about these resources. Because you see, the thing is that there are a lot of different types of resources. So pick up any simple product such as this t-shirt over here. And if you start thinking about all the inputs or resources that would have been required to make this, then you can end up with a long list. Because you would have required cotton, the raw material, then you would have required a farmer to look after that cotton field, then you would have required a tailor to stitch this thing together, and that tailor maybe would have required a machine, and so on and so forth. And then you can pick up some other product and again make a long list. But economists, they don't think of all these different resources individually. Instead, they have a very specific and organized way of thinking about all of these resources. And what they do is that they always talk of these resources in terms of 4 broad categories, which they call land, labor, capital, and enterprise. And what you need to know and remember are the key characteristics or properties that determine whether a certain resource would be called capital or labor or land or enterprise. And that is what the examiner will test you upon through the MCQs, at least a couple of MCQs every year. Now it is quite simple, easy stuff, so I will go quickly through the first 2, and then as we go through capital and enterprise, we will try to develop some other useful, broader economic ideas. So this will be a slightly longer discussion over here for the last 2 of these resources. Now let me just get rid of all of this first of all, and then start off with this first factor of production, land. Now by land, we simply mean all the natural resources that are available to the country. So any input that occurs or grows naturally. So you can think of coal, you can think of minerals, you can think of wood, because you can make furniture with wood, and wood grows or occurs naturally. So any natural resource, that is all that you need to know. Now, some of you might get confused because in everyday language, by land we mean this piece of earth. Now that piece of earth, that is also included in this economic definition of land, that is also considered to be a natural resource, but just one of the many other natural resources that together all mean the resource of land in the economic sense of the word. Now the next vector of production, labor, it simply means all the human effort that goes into the process of production. Now remember, we are not saying here the number of people. The amount of resource labor, it's closely related to the number of people, but what we precisely mean is the number of hours of human effort. That is what we mean by the resource of labor. Now this human input, this human effort can either be physical, so think about a farmer working with his hands on his field, or it can be mental, where you can just think of an engineer sitting behind his computer and trying to build a new model. So that would be mental human effort, mental labor. Now whether the human effort is physical or mental, the owners of this resource of labor, people who go to work and provide their human effort, they will not do it for free. They would want to be compensated, they would want to get a reward. And the reward received by this factor of production, labor, is known as wage. Now this most of us know, but it is important for you to remember that the rewards that each of these owners of these different resources get, they have a very specific name. So the owners of land, the compensation, the reward, the money they would receive by people who use their resource is known as rent, and the reward received by the owners of capital is known as interest, and the reward received by the owners of enterprise is known as profit. So that these are small little details that you need to know again from your MCQ's point of view. Now once that's out of the way, we can now talk about capital, which is the third and a very interesting factor of production. Now first thing I want you to remember is that by capital we do not mean cash, or we do not mean wealth or the stocks or shares of a company. That is the way the subject of finance defines capital. In economics, we have our own way of defining capital, and we say that capital are all those resources that are first of all and very importantly man-made things. That is, these are resources that can themselves be produced in factories, and once these things, these goods, this capital has been produced, you will be able to use it again and again to produce further or more goods and services. So basically what we mean here is tools and equipments and machinery, because if you think about a machine, then it is something that you will be able to use again and again to make more and more goods and services, and it's a man-made thing. But don't just keep your thinking restricted to machinery as what a capital is. Stick to these two criteria, and if you think through them, then even a table or a furniture that a restaurant uses will count as the resource of capital, because those tables are man-made things, and then you can use them again and again to serve more and more customers. That is what makes it capital, and that is the way I want you to think about this resource when the A-level MCQs ask you to identify whether a certain resource is capital or not. Now those are the basics that you need to know for your MCQs, but this resource of capital is very interesting and very unique. And that uniqueness in turn has very important economic implications that are useful and good to know going into your A-level exams. So what makes this resource of capital unique is this characteristic over here, that these resources are themselves man-made things. They can themselves be produced in a factory. And that is different to all the other three resources that you see over here. You cannot make land, labor, and enterprise in factories. Now, yes, sometimes the government tries very hard through a lot of different policies to somehow increase the amount of land, labor, and enterprise, but capital is the easiest resource to have more of. You can just simply make it, produce it yourself in a factory. And that is important, and that is good, and that is also sort of bad. Let me explain. The problem of a poor country is that they have too few resources. Now, resources will always be limited, but we are saying poor countries, they have very few resources. So they can make very few goods and services, and therefore wants of most of the people in the society are not satisfied, and overall, therefore, they are a poor country. Now, if they are suffering because of having too few resources, now here we are saying that, look, there is a resource of capital, you can simply make it in a factory. So you can end this suffering. How? By every year making more and more and more and more capital. That is where in economics we say you can accumulate more capital, and gradually after a few years you will have quite a few resources, therefore you will be able to produce quite a few goods and services, and therefore you will end up having better future living standard. And that is the sort of solution that is recommended to a lot of poor countries. They are always encouraged, recommended to invest. And investment in economic literally means production of capital goods. In economics, investment doesn't mean buying a plot that you hope will double in its price. So when every government, every international donor, every economic policymaker advises countries, poor countries, that look, you need to invest more, they are just telling them in a technical way, in a technical jargon, we are saying that, look, make more capital goods so that you end up with more resources in the future. But most of these countries don't listen. Why? Because they say that, look, we already have very few resources. And if we start allocating some of these resources to make capital goods that will allow us to have a better future living standard, then we cannot wait for that future. We will have to give up too much of our current living standard. We will be left with just a few resources to produce all the goods and services that we need in the current year. So that gives rise to this classic trade-off that we talk of in economics, the trade-off between current and future living standards. And that is important. That is what will show up when we talk about the production possibility curves. We will need to show through this graphical model exactly this trade-off between current and future living standard, revolving around this fact that capital, the resource of capital, is a man-made thing. You can make it, but then you will have to lose your current living standard. So we'll look at all the details when we get there, but it is good to have this base from the very beginning. Anyhow, I don't want to go into any more detail. This is a topic that can be discussed in a very interesting way, but that will take us away from the focus. So let us come back to this last and fourth resource of enterprise. Again, let me remind you, we are just trying to understand the few basic characteristics that define whether a certain resource is land, labor, capital, or enterprise. Now, this resource of enterprise is defined by, first of all, the key characteristic that this is the resource who organize all the other factors of production and carry out this process of production. Now, if that doesn't make sense, then basically simply what we are saying here is that by the resource of enterprise, we simply mean businessmen and entrepreneurs who bring in new ideas and who sort of go through the pain of renting a place, hiring people, buying machinery, and putting everything in place to carry out this process of production. So the role of organization is the key to define the resource of entrepreneurs. And these entrepreneurs are very important in a free market, because it is these entrepreneurs, these businessmen, who try to sort of gauge what the consumer wants and then invent new products and invent new ways of combining all the different resources that the country possesses and make something out of it. So they have a key role to play in the free market. They have a key role to sort of identify and make the free market system react to the wants of the people. But in addition to this key characteristic of organizing all of these different resources, entrepreneurs are also defined by the key characteristic that they are the only resource that take the risk of either getting this reward of profit or maybe ending up with a loss. And that is unique to entrepreneurs, because think of a labor. If you start a new job and work there for a month and your boss doesn't like your work and fires you, he can fire you, but he will have to pay you for the 1 month's work that you have given him. So the reward to the factor of production labor is guaranteed once you have provided the human effort. Similarly, if the owner of land rents you a piece of or area of earth where you build a restaurant and it doesn't work out, then you will still have to pay that owner of land the rent. So his reward is always guaranteed. But entrepreneurs, we say that first of all, they organize all the other factors of production and then they wait and take the risk that whether they will end up with a successful business and therefore get the reward of profit, or maybe just go home making a loss. So again, in the MCQs, when you have to identify whether a certain resource is an enterprise or not, these are the two key things to look for. Are they putting together the different resources, and are they taking the risk of either making a profit or a loss? In general terms, just remember this resource as simply being entrepreneurs or the businessmen.